On the next level, there were provincial councils, and the highest level was a Jewish parliament, you might say, the Vad Arba Artsot, the Council of the Four Lands, which was developed around 1580 and which was dissolved in 1764. And add to that the Council of Lithuania, and you have a far-flung and highly developed network of Jewish autonomous organizations, which gave the Jews a sense of honor and gave the Jews a sense of political status. Now, what did the councils do? The Council of the Four Lands' main responsibility on paper was to pay a set tax to the Polish treasury based on the Jewish population. But the council did a lot more than that. The council would hire lobbyists, the so-called Stadlin, S-H-T-A-D-L-I-N. The lobbyist would be a Jew who knew Polish very well, and that was only a tiny, tiny minority of the Jewish population. The Stadlin, like a lobbyist on K Street in DC, would be given a lavish expense account. He'd be told to entertain well. He was especially busy when the Polish parliament was in session, and his job was to schmooze, to glad hand, to talk to the members of the Sejm, the Polish parliament, the nobles, find out what laws were in the pipeline, which might affect Jews, and make sure that bad laws got sidetracked and good laws were passed. Another function of the Vad Arba Artsot was to enforce Jewish law. Because of this far-flung system of Jewish autonomy in Poland, the Talmud, which by now was printed and readily available. Again, I'm talking after the late 16th century. The Talmud in Jewish law became not just something that you studied, but it became the basis of living legislation. And the great Polish rabbis like Sirkis and like Isserles and the Maharshal became vitally important authorities, not just because of their erudition in Jewish texts, but because their rulings were actually enacted in real life. The Council of the Four Lands had to tailor Jewish law to real challenges. As the Jews played a bigger and bigger role in economic life, what do you do about interest? What do you do about Jews lending money to other Jews? How do you get around this prohibition on charging interest to a fellow Jew? What do you do about Jews who will go to a Polish prince and say, I know you leased this forest to Yankel, but I'll pay you more money? So the Council of the Four Lands tried to enforce the idea of a chazaka, that Jews do not compete with other Jews, do not try to undermine their economic status. The Council of the Four Lands tried to make it difficult for Jewish women this was something that they weren't always successful with. They tried to pass laws saying that on Rosh Hashanah and on Pesach, when Jewish women go to the synagogue, they shouldn't be wearing too many rocks on their fingers, the so-called sumptuary laws. They should dress very modestly so the Gentiles don't think the Jews have so much money. The fact that the council kept on passing these sumptuary laws meant that usually they weren't really listened to or taken that seriously. Now, there were Jewish historians later on, like Shimon Dubnov, who idealized the Council of the Four Lands, who said this is an example of how we, Jews, can flourish in the diaspora. And in the 20th century, many diaspora nationalists who thought that the future of the Jews could be in the diaspora held out the Council of the Four Lands as an example of how Jews could have their own autonomous government even in Europe. Then there were other historians like Raphael Mahler and Emanuel Ringelblum who, as Marxists, saw the Council of the Four Lands as just another way for the rich to exploit the poor. And the truth, of course, is that the Council of the Four Lands was never as wonderful as many people claimed, and its authority did tend to erode, especially in the 18th century. But that said, it played a very important role, and it gave the Jews a sense of political status and political belonging. Now, the basic arbiter of social mobility in Jewish society was education. It was a rule that every Jewish boy had to have an education. You were not allowed to let a boy grow up illiterate. Now, that said, if you came from a wealthier family, you had a better teacher. You had a better cheder. Cheder was the basic primary school. If you were poor, you went to a community cheder, a Talmud Torah, where the instruction wasn't as good and where the teacher was not as good. And the status of the teacher was, ironically, very, very low. A Melamed, or a teacher, was a very low status occupation in traditional Jewish society, not like now. And then around the time of Bar Mitzvah, that was the great sorting out. Most kids went into their family business, they stopped their formal education, or they became apprentices or artisans. A very few went on to study in a yeshiva, where they would then earn titles like Chaver, Morenu, or they would get smicha to be a rabbi. And again, it was that small group that was able to progress beyond the cheder into a higher level of study, which formed the upper level of Jewish society. And that was not a hermetically closed group. As I said before, it was possible to get in even if you didn't have money. It was hard, but it was not impossible.